So welcome everyone. Today we're starting a webinar to look at various aspects of GenAI and its impact on both high performance computing and instruction. And we have four speakers today that will touch on very different aspects of this. And we're going to begin today with Arvind Bansal from Kent State University, who will be talking about his program in artificial intelligence at Kent State. So Arvind, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, Steve. So today we'll talk about our experience with AI program, which we started in Kent State, and OSC's impact on our partnership, on educational partnership in AI. And so in 2021, we started a master's in AI program, and PhD in AI is within computer science. Master's was started to address the issue of required growth in knowledge science in the society, and the lack of industrial professionals prompted us to go to state of Ohio and start Masters of AI. And state of Ohio was very generous, and they let us start the master's program to fill in the gap between the requirement and the lack of industrial professionals. So in Masters of AI program, in our curriculum, we started a curriculum with a focus on three aspects: intelligent analytics, smart society, and robotics. And we'll talk about that. Here the pictures which you see are some of the projects taken from the students' work in master's and PhD program. So we have been working on, in PhD, we have worked on cardiac aberrations, deep learning models for cardiac aberrations, and deep learning model for renal disease detection. And then under master's program, we have worked on medical diagnostics, on skin cancer, lung cancer, liver cancer, traffic congestion analysis, pedestrian detection, satellite image analysis, and we'll talk about that. Okay, so the overall outline of the presentation is modern day AI requirements in marketplace, Kent State Masters in AI program, and role of OSC in preparing AI workforce, KSU and OSC educational partnership in Masters in AI and PhD program. And then we'll talk about PhD research projects and contributions of our Masters in AI program and OSC contribution from Spring 23 to Spring 26. We started our master's program in Spring 2021. First graduate came out in Spring 23, and since then we have been graduating. So in modern day AI requirement in marketplace, as you all know, has been very disruptive, both positively and negatively. And but it has contributed significantly into intelligent analytics, medical diagnostics, defense sector, surveillance, manufacturing, information visualization, automated coding using LLM, education, smart homes, cybersecurity, homeland security, energy distribution, and transportation. And Ohio has got significant industry in all these areas, except that it doesn't have the AI workforce to address the issues. So that's where we started our master's program. So there is a severe shortage of AI professionals in the market workplace. And uh, most of the computational requirement is significant. You must have heard about Google Colab, but when we want to talk about industrial requirement and training the students or the workforce, the project, they have to develop industrial level projects, and every project required thousands of hours of training on massive parallel processors and huge amount of memory requirement. And that's where OSC comes into play, because most of the educational institutions don't have that kind of resources which OSC has. So KSU master's program in artificial intelligence was started in spring 2021 to keep up with 30 to 40% growth in AI sector. And this is disruptive. That was our estimate at that time. But by knowing the job displacement and limited job growth, we know that it is more disruptive than what we thought earlier. And this is the link to our program. And so if I just give you an idea about this program, everybody can see this program, this link?
No, it didn't come up. So why don't you go on? We'll post
Okay.
it so they can see it later.
Yeah. So the mandate was to prepare future knowledge processing AI workforce for Ohio. And we had three major theme areas: intelligent analytics, smart society and automation, and robotics. And analytics prepare for big data or information processing, medical diagnostics, and automated image processing for cancer, defense sector through satellite image analysis, environmental calamity prediction and logistics, and use of LLMs, large language models, for natural language-based information processing. Smart society and automation prepares for futuristic society for smart homes, including IoT, resource optimization, social planning and distribution, including energy distribution and transportation, and traffic analysis, and so on. Robotics prepares for futuristic manufacturing, automated repair, calamity control, defense, and homeland security. So that was our goal when we started in spring 21. The role of ASC in preparing AI workforce, as we saw that at that time, was that they will fill in the computing resources which the modern day AI required. And Kent State University, being an R1 university, is heavily invested in AI growth. Kent State has a state of Ohio mandate to invest in AI workforce, and we use capstone projects, which are industrial scale projects, to prepare graduates so that when they enter into industry, they are prepared to formulate and solve the problems of the industry. And we also wanted to develop research and academic leaders of AI-based society through our computer science PhD program. Till now, through Kent State AI and OSC Educational Partnership, starting from spring 23 to spring 26, we have graduated around 35 MSAI students, and 3 PhD students have graduated under my supervision, and I'm sure that there are many more uh, among other faculty members who are filling in AI requirement, although I don't know how many of them are using OSC resources. Some of them are using quantum computing with Cleveland Clinic. So it's a distributed use of massive parallel computing in AI. KSU and OSC educational partnership started, in 2022 when Professor Khan suggested that for my requirement, I should use OSC resources, and in my class of advanced AI, which is part of MSAI program, through the homeworks, assignments, and the final projects, we teach them AI programming and use extensive library which OSC has. So the first they learn three programming framework: TensorFlow, PyTorch, and Keras programming, and then they use these projects for cancer diagnostics, satellite image analysis, automated disaster detection, LLM applications, traffic management, and knowledge transfer using large language models. There also I've used OSC requirement for 3 PhD projects. One is automated medical diagnostics for cardiac structural abnormalities, and I'll talk about it, and automated kidney cancer detection. And so these two projects are clinical projects, and they match the expert knowledge, clinical expert knowledge in terms of accuracy. And the third one is more of a gathering more knowledge. So it's a research study which talks about miRNA and mRNA interaction. mRNA is the protein translation mechanism, and disruption of mRNA translation causes many pathway disruptions in human body, which is responsible for many human diseases. And miRNA interaction disrupts, or it helps mRNA translation to the protein, and the diseases which are impacted could be cancer or many other genetic diseases. So if I talk about MSAI projects through OSC educational partnership, then as I said, students learn to program TensorFlow, PyTorch, and Keras on OSC computers, and then they apply learned advanced AI techniques and deep learning to develop industrial scale projects. Some of the techniques used are computer vision analysis, semantic segmentation, and large language models. And OSC has got extensive AI libraries, and they download or use the National Public Image databases, and then develop the code on OSC computers, and then use the memory resources of OSC on these databases to develop the project. Some of the examples of the projects which we have used on are brain tumor analysis, liver cancer analysis, lung cancer analysis, skin cancer analysis, which I have not discussed here, large language model-based medical advice, and large language model-based knowledge transfer. We have also used it for battlefield object detection, like tank detection, tank formation detection, natural disaster analysis such as flood analysis, and earthquake analysis. So till now, 35 students have made use of these OSC resources under this master's program, and 3 PhD students have used that. So as I said, that PhD research projects, one of them is automated cardiac abnormality, and I've graduated one PhD student in fall 2025, and she used new advanced deep learning model for artery and valve abnormalities, and the accuracy and automated localization of cardiac myopathy, ventricle abnormality, blood ejection rate, and the clinical accuracy is between 95 to 99%. So that means it can be used clinically into the workplace. So it is ready for technology transfer. Another student I've used for kidney cancer diagnosis. She just graduated in spring 2026 on May 7th, and she has developed many advanced deep learning models for early stage cancer detection and classification using radiology images and histology images. Now, the important thing about this project was that radiology images are minimally invasive, and she could do early stage detection, which was not done earlier in kidney cancer. So, and the accuracy is again above 95%. So it is also ready for technology transfer at industrial scale. The third one, more on the knowledge scale, is miRNA interaction, and the student just graduated on May 7th in spring 2026. And as I said, that miRNA are small molecules which regulate the protein translation by interacting with mRNAs. So if we know the interaction sites, we can block them or we can enhance them depending on the disease so that protein imbalance in human pathways can be minimized or made, protein level can be optimal. So, in concluding it, Kent State is playing a major role in developing AI workforce for 21st century, industrial workforce leadership, and MSAI program, which was started, is for industrial leadership and PhD research using OSC resources is for clinical level diagnostics and new knowledge, and it provides academic leadership. OSC is providing a crucial partnership needed for large industrial scale resources and to prepare AI workforce of 21st century. So using this MSAI program and the OSC resources for PhD level research, Ohio is better prepared for large scale application of AI in these three areas, and also in clinical diagnostics and automated analysis. And I would like to acknowledge these people who have contributed to this partnership. Philip Thomas, who is our regular guide for Ohio Supercomputing Center resources. My PhD students, Brad, Rachel, and Neha, who have contributed to this research project using OSC resources, and my MS students in Advanced Artificial Intelligence class, Professor Javed Khan, who introduced me to Ohio Supercomputing Center in 2022, and Professor Steve Garden for opportunity to present this detail.
All right, thank you so much.
Thank you.
So if people have questions, hold them till the end and till the other speakers go. And so now if you could stop your share and we'll turn it over to Dr. Basil Masri Zada from Ohio University.
Thank you. Okay, let me just share my screen. Okay. Can you see my full screen?
Yes.
Okay. Hello, everyone. So I'm Basil Masri Zada. I'm an assistant professor of instruction of digital art and technology. And the first disclaimer I will give, I'm not a computer scientist. Our main approach, or my main approach that came to using GenAI in general was coming from ethical concerns and challenges that artists have everywhere in the world. The main challenges comes from concerns about how it's going to affect their work, what data is being collected after they generate their work, and what happened with their generation, uh, like where the data came from and what happened with generation after they produced their work. And these ethical concerns in general is affecting them due to the main purpose of what artists do, which is our intellectual property. And if they feel that is being threatened in any way, that's where they have a huge resistance in that regard. And based on this, I wanted to think about it from an educational point of view, as thinking about how Gen AI in general affecting education and what challenges it have. I'm taking this approach to presenting today my like the project that I've been working on to explain why we had to go this length to do what we are doing. The main challenge that comes first place for artists and for education in general is that not everything that is legal is ethical, and not everything that is ethical is legal. And as long as GenAI is not regulated in a manner that unified the approach to it, uh, different institutions, different artists, different groups approach it differently, and it affected. Many galleries all around the world, whenever they see the word Gen AI, they reject the work automatically. And that's affecting artists to be able to explore or engage. And same time, they have other concerns in that regard. What I usually tell my students, or when I tell my colleagues about it, that using Gen AI in education and in art is not new. What's new is how it got democratized, that everyone have it on the tip of their phone or computer, that they could start generate something in seconds, which was not available before. Artists have worked even in the 70s and 80s to create automation using different algorithmics, formulas, and math to create machines that create work of art that they called it Gen Art. They coined the term in 2008, and it continued to work. They called it now the term Gen Art is now like shadowed by generative art by AI, but it existed as a mathematic formula or as an electronic art terminology in that regard. But the main issues is for artists is how AI is trained, and there's a lot of AI models that don't show their source data or they don't explain it. For example, there is a website that many AI models have released their training data. It's called, in a website called Have I Been Trained? And in there, you could go to see the visual images they use for their data. They are showing only a portion of it in there, but at the same time, I found images of me presenting in one conference at Ohio University in there. So technically, I have been in there because it turned out that anything that is public domain or some of the Creative Commons and others are going into training, and it's impossible to vet everything. And for art itself, artists use Instagram and other public domains or websites to show their work, which complicated the concept of ethical use, and artists feel cheated in that regard. And the other important part for artists in specific is like, okay, what happens to my generation after I generate? And this is where it's really critical for them. Is the AI company benefiting from my work? Is the privacy settings by themselves are enough? Are the original data that I'm using right now, it's built on someone else's work, or is it fully unique? And the privacy settings in general, what are they gathering and how they are benefiting from all of that? And that leads to the issue with paid versus free models and terms of service and copyrights. The thing is, many people don't read the terms of service when they're using any AI model. They focus on the free models to experiment, and they believe in the end they have the full copyrights for everything. An example of this is uh, actually three examples I will give. The first example is Suno AI, which is an AI company that generates music. In their terms of service, they say anything you generate for free is owned by us. Anything you generate paid, you could do whatever you want to do with it. And we discovered later while talking with people from visual communication with music industry that whenever you're using Spotify and say play jazz music, it's actually using in the back end Suno AI to generate music, so they don't have to pay real artists royalties. And this is where it started to create an ethical problem in there because there is always a way to avoid to pay creators, and that's what makes artists really concerned about it, because it's being used in a way that is trying to avoid creators, avoid creativity, and focus on that generic mode that might be problematic for some artists. But the core for it from educational and artistic point of view is who is the author. It's a really important question because there is a lot of fights on that regard between artists claiming that AI stole their work, between artists who used AI in an authentic way, they cannot copyright their work, including some of my work that I use AI and how much I go for an extra length to actually prove authorship. And one of the things that I'll put on the sign, I have been writing a paper about it, that can we detect AI work? Because everyone is using it. All our students are using it. Some of our colleagues using it to grade students, and there's creating that cyclical problems. And if we detect it, is it actually accurate or not? Which is a total different conversation, but just wanted to mention it as an ethical problem. So I'll focus specifically on copyrights and then I will branch it out back to artists in that regard. Because from a copyright, the higher institution of copyright in the United States, who actually argue about copyrights, argued that the copyright law that was coined when computers came in and tried to actually argue that computer-based work law that was in the 70s and 80s still applies in here, which means that the three pillars they argued for copywriting work is first need to be fixated work, which means it's not changing. So it's hard to actually copyright a Facebook post or a blog post as a copyrightable because it could change anytime. The second pillar is like the originality, independent creation, and have some spark of creativity, which we argue that most art have that. But the third pillar is where the argument's coming, and that's why they are not trying to update this language, going back to the computer-based argument in 70s and 80s, that it need to have the author, the independent author, the human. Based on this argument, many companies, many lawyers trying, I'm not a lawyer, so this is the interpretation that I had to fight when I had to show some of my work in some exhibition. Their argument saying that most AI generated art is considered public domain. It's not copyrightable, it's not owned by me, it's either owned by the company as the creator or it's owned for the public good. The only argument that artists started to make is AI art is copyrighted to you if you could prove your human authorship, control, and concept. In other words, I need to show my contribution from the start to end to show that AI is a tool, it's not a purpose, it's not random. And this is where the wording right now, it's not random. So the example of it is when we argue about photography, if it's art and not art. Is the camera is a tool, or is it the one that I have high-tech end camera, I click a button, it's creating, taking a photo, it's not art. And this is where we're reaching out from technology. In art and design in general, there is other ethical concerns that artists have. I would tell you, I had this semester or spring, I had a class, we're teaching digital fabrication, and we mentioned that students allowed to explore using AI, and we're going to use AI hosted on the Ohio supercomputer as open source, open weighted models. And it's an option to explore it, to understand it, rather than trying to ignore it. But I had 3 students drop that class out of 15 in the day off when they heard we are using AI because they believe all AI is bad, it destroys the environment, it have a lot of energy concerns, and they are not willing to use any tool, even if it's optional, that could destroy environment. The second part of it, that electronic part impact, like I learned from our Ohio University IT department, that all the memory RAMs for commercial for consumer based already sold for 2026, and we're going to have an electronic part shortage in that regard, and there's a lot of impact of data centers all over Ohio, and a lot of people are resisting to it due to the assumed environmental impact. And artists, as usually socially conscious, they believe AI is destructive in that regard. And the next part of it is like they believe that anything that the AI create is built on someone else's work. They are not compensated for it. And finally, it's exploitation of human trainers. The idea of it that there is a lot of stories or articles talking about the trainers have to actually see a lot of horrific things to actually be the human in the loop to be able to filter what AI is producing, and it's creating a lot, and it's topic by itself. But from all of these, artists have a high critical approach to AI and high resistance. They don't think about it of how much useful it is due to the other elements that are problematic for that regard. And plus, there is an equity issue by the price tag because each artist access to materials are different. And now when we add paid versus free versus other models, it makes it impossible for some artists to be able to explore it in a safely manner. I put this table in here. It's one of my colleagues who is a faculty fellow of GenAI. I'm also a faculty fellow of GenAI at Ohio University, and he teaches plant biology and environmental studies. And he is one of the scholars who actually explore GenAI in education, but at the same time, his students believe he's a hypocrite because they argue, how can you teach environmental studies while using AI and don't understand the water toll that it do in there? Like AI is destroying water, it's consuming all of this, and data centers are bad, etc., etc. So he created this table. I'm not going to go in details on it, but what is his conclusion is based on this table, and I provided the actual slides for Steve so he could follow some of the logic in here. But he argued that yes, AI uses water, but there is not enough water in the world to allow Gen AI to run based on these calculations. And he's arguing that some of these calculations are talking about it in a sterile situation. It's not talking about realistic situation, regulations, recycling of water, rainwater, and others. And actually, when I took my student to the Ohio supercomputer, that's what the first question they asked in there, because that's where the concern come. And right now, I'm using this slide as an example for artists to understand that we need to understand beyond just the initial or hype about something, because that's where we start to deconstruct this. And this is where I'm coming with the case study that I did in art education and ethics in general. And I will be brief in here. There is a lot of problems using Gen AI in art. In addition to everything I mentioned, there is the like stereotyping. There is like public domain problems based on how other culture, other languages in there. It's unpredicted. There's a potential to create deceitful content or fake information. And there's a lot of problems in that regard. And to be like on time in here, I want to mention that like these two imagery, the ones on the left, I don't own any copyright for them. I don't own them. The one on the right is a copyrighted artwork that I generated using an open source stable diffusion hosted on the Ohio supercomputer. One is copyrighted, was exhibited in an international exhibition. The other that have the images of me, I don't own it. And that's when I started to explore that, okay, how do we make human control to allow us to be able to produce work using Gen AI based on our authorship and control without actually losing authorship or copyrights. The images on the left, it have my image. I lost that image. It's now owned by DALL-E because that's how their terms of service explain it. So I created 2 pages statement, actually putting the parameter on how, what, and how to cite AI use, and how to be the human in the loop, which is part of our university initiative, the human in the loop in using Gen AI to be able to copyright your work. And these 2 pages, it's in each syllabi and each assignment that I submit that they use AI in there, because I'm trying to make them be able to claim their work, not to lose their copyrights. And this is where the need for the Ohio supercomputer or the high performance computer came in there. First, we need to break out from the commercial use. Second, we need to allow to have a human control in each aspect of the generation. It's not to remove the element of randomness and to actually create control in there. So we started to experiment by in different open source, open weight models, image to image, text to image, image to text, sequencing. Like we created our original method of sequencing before video generation was existing, and our method still powerful because it allowed more control in there. We explored with LLMs, sound-based, sketch to 3D. We use them in 3D fabrication courses this semester. including using 3D printers, laser cutters, and CNC machines. Imagine sketching a 3D model for an industrial part that we could 3D print in minutes rather than spending 2 years to actually develop it. We could have a faster outcome to produce, especially when we are trying to customize parts in that regard. Most of our work is original contribution. Because of the open source open weight model, it allows us to host them privately on the Ohio supercomputer. It have higher privacy. Students feel more comfortable to actually use them. We have more control or full control. I will show example about this in a second. It's private, local, secure. The student have remote access. We don't have an infrastructure for students to run these models on computers or on their devices in that regard. The same part of it of how the Ohio supercomputer explained it to our students. Using the Ohio supercomputer in the way of how it's being arranged right now, we're using less energy consumption. We are way more conscious about the environment. It have more ethical and legal approach. It's more authentic. It's copyrightable. Sometimes it's trainable depending on the model, which we're exploring that, and we are allow us to create a lot of custom models. So this is an example of one of the program we use, which is Stable Diffusion, and we're pushing for a new one. I show this not from a technical point of view, but from a copyright point of view. When I'm copywriting my work, this is what I'm showing of the control. I call it the airplane versus a bicycle. The commercial Gen AI models, it's like a bicycle or it's like a car. You turn on the car, you learn a little bit of prompt engineering and create work. In here, you could control each aspect of the generation. And that's where Ohio University is seeing the value on having some of these due to everything mentioned, plus the control or copyrightability. This is an example of some of the like open web UI explorations, and we're exploring with LLMs and comparing between them for coding purposes because we use a lot of creative coding. We're exploring right now with our supercomputer with Comfy UI, including an image to 3D model creation. And the idea of it is using this node system or visual coding system that allow more control, that the workflow could be copyrighted in that regard and create uniqueness. In the end, our students still creating, still exploring, creating with circuitry, creating with projections, light, sound, shadow, all of the work they create, storyboarding, collaborating with the community partners, video games, and others without compromising their own creativity. Thank you.
Thank you so much. That's really a fascinating subject and very important one.
Thank you.
Next, I'm going to ask Connor Kenyon to share his experience with Gen AI and HPC.
Right. Hi, everyone. My name is Connor Kenyon. I am a research computing facilitator at UMass Dartmouth. So not, the normal faculty for teaching this, but I'm staff here and I've done computational support and facilitation for about 7 years. So a little bit about the class I was teaching, just for some background on that. It is a class called High Performance Scientific Computing. It covers an assortment of topics in HPC, which is usually at the instructor's discretion. It has the typical mainstays of parallel computing and all of that, but some of the more special topics in the course or specific subsections of HPC or scientific computing are at the discretion of the instructor. It's listed in a bunch of different programs, so data science, engineering and applied science, math at graduate and undergraduate levels. So that is to say it varies a lot per semester, whether that's in who's in your section, which sections there are, or what the typical background academically or computationally is from the students. So it's hard to kind of preset some expectation for the course. We generally recommend having a moderate amount of Python experience and familiarity with a compiled language or shell environments, because those are sort of the unavoidable things. That being said, students have succeeded with no experience or with a ton of experience, or failed with similar. So it's a very mixed bag. And now my particular class was it was about just under 30 students, so it was already a large graduate course. This I taught it in fall last year, so this is relatively recent. but this was my experience teaching it. And in my course, there was, I think, about 5 undergraduate students and 25 graduate data science students, which are usually first-year graduate students, so they haven't had a time to build up some predictable set of skills yet. So there was no consistent background. Most were familiar with Python. A few had some more extensive experience with that. Um, very few had any experience at all with compiled languages, and there was a mixed bag of backgrounds for the students. Uh, so I didn't really have much of a basis for, where to come from for that. Now, previously, the course has mostly been taught by engineering, science, and math faculty. So they teach it from a lot more of an academia prioritizing strategy, which is, mainly going through a lot of algorithms, or, focusing on those, um, essentially the scientific portion, or the math behind that. But seeing as there's less interest in that side of it and more interest in learning just enough HPC to see what you can do with, Gen AI or machine learning, is of more interest. So I focused on a little bit of a different set of topics. So to briefly go over kind of what I covered for this, it was a lot of more shell scripting and navigation and kind of living in the command line environment for Bash, a little bit of Python, but mostly just for data visualization. As little C as I could possibly do, because these students had never seen any compiled languages really. Um, and that is expensive in terms of time to teach it. Uh, I did a little bit on convergent tests, general HPC topics, some Slurm, parallel computing, and then with the remaining time in the course, as much as I could cover on GPU computing, debugging, profiling, and other things that, I was trying to prioritize what students wouldn't cover in any other course. So I was really trying to concentrate on the high performance computing aspect in as much capacity as possible. So uh, with the title of the description of the talk, I did say that I didn't restrict AI. I let them use kind of as much AI as they wanted throughout the course, for better or worse, to see how they would take that and turn it into something useful or not useful. But with that in mind, I gave them access to a high performance computing cluster on day one. So I had them, onboarded in a shell as soon as I could. I focused on, instead of teaching them to code, I tried to detach this and make it not a coding class, which was a much different approach, and was probably the biggest adjustment was I removed more of that than, or as much as I could. I tried to avoid depending on AI, but encouraged using it as a tool rather than something to use as your only tool. That was a lot of trial and error and probably the biggest headache in the course. And then a couple of these things I had to modify during the course. So I started providing boilerplate codes, basically just giving them the framework for a code so I didn't have to, cover some of the overall coding nuance and let them focus on what portions were scalable and what portions, would be more impactful for them to iterate with. And then I did have to switch to pen and paper exams, as a result of that as well. So the early cluster access, I ran the course using the Unity cluster, which is based out of Holyoke, Massachusetts. It's started as a shared cluster by the UMass system, but is kind of expanding to a regional cluster. I had them just on the open on demand interface. This was probably one of the bigger successes of the semester, in that I didn't have to fight with which operating system they were using. I didn't have to make sure every student had the same computer or was using the same laptop all the time for compatibility. Everybody was using the same operating system, and it was able to just give them a more complete immersion in it so that they were using the HPC system the entire time for everything. So that immersion was fantastic, and it was very successful. So the core HPC concepts, I tried to restrict it more to when I was teaching was um, navigating the command line, which as a facilitator, that's a huge struggle for a lot of new HPC users. They get into the command line and they're terrified. The typical pipelines you see for how to test your code, build your code, test your code, submit a job, and then do some post-processing. Compiling code on a system that's not just able to have sudo access or root access or administrator access, is something new to most of these students. Using Slurm or a similar scheduler, environment modules, so loading modules to have the right software available, dealing with dependencies, parallel computing, and then measuring performance, managing your data. Those two, I think, are typically under prioritized in this course, because the whole point of high performance computing is to show that it's performing more. Those were what I kind of restricted the course to. Um, Now, when I'm referring to dependence on AI, so the goal is to use it as a tool. What some students were getting caught in is they would get the assignment, ask AI for a solution, whichever LLM was their preference, copy it, run the code. If it doesn't work, just keep doing that over and over again until it works, and then finish. Now, when they got stuck there, they weren't learning any concepts. That was the biggest issue. So I was trying to disrupt this however I can, and that's where the boilerplate code kind of came about, was to prevent them from getting caught in making sure the whole code works by giving them code that works, but they need to, make it parallel or improve the functionality. And I think at the heart of that problem, that is what much of HPC is these days. You're not typically, starting from blank code and writing a whole thing. You're starting with something you pull from GitHub or some another your faculty advisor's project or any other existing code. You're adding some functionality or adding your own input files and using that. So structuring that way, I think, sat well with how to learn HPC today, since it's much different than it was 10, 15, 20 years ago. Some of the gotchas that I would see in some of the students that fell into this trap these were all students who had just about never seen Bash before. And I saw a few things that no student could explain what it did. I was aware, but you'd see these popping up. They even made their way to the pen and paper final exam, some of them. So you could tell when some students got really lost in this trap of overly relying on this to the point where they were skipping some skills. But while these all do work, they were either not taught or would not really show up in the course and aren't relevant to what's being done in a typically minimal bash script or minimal batch script for Slurm. So and then moving through some of the other stuff, when I provided code, teaching C takes a lot of time. It's pretty large to students who haven't done much programming. So I'd spent about one and maybe half out of a lecture just covering some minimal C. I provided code because students will use GenAI anyways, which is not bad. I didn't ban it. I didn't restrict it at all. But they were going to use it anyways, so I might as well give them some base code that I felt was more useful and structured towards what I wanted them to do. I focused on them modifying some existing code and adding functionality, and that most HP is not from scratch. And what I provided this tested and validated code that I knew would do the problem. I would typically write the whole solution and then just delete part and leave the blank lines, and leave them to figure out what to do for the actual performance part. So it was easy enough to read, commented, and really just plain boilerplate. By the end of the semester, what I felt worked and didn't, I thought avoiding as much C development time as I could was great. That saved a lot of wasted time debugging C, which isn't learning how to debug HPC thing, that's just learning C. The immersion on the cluster was great, including I did spend part of the first couple lectures on the cluster having them learn VI so that they could edit on a cluster. It was a little bit challenging for them as they'd never seen anything like that, but I feel like it was worthwhile by the end. And I did keep it to a very few algorithms since they didn't come from like a mathematical or scientific background. Some of the things that didn't work was I thought the algorithms I kept it to were just two different numerical integration methods, one with Monte Carlo and one with the trapezoidal rule, and these we're still out of touch with many of the students, so they kind of detached early on and they ignored that. I had more students than I would have liked, overly dependent on AI, adjusting to data science topics, something that I needed to do. I took away the final project over concerns that it was just going to be AI generated final project and wouldn't indicate any meaningful learning. The exam content felt lackluster because that was kind of swapped in place of the final project. And then heavily weighted exams encourage students to try to find a way to use LLMs to help with their exam. Typically, I would have preferred like a part pen and paper, part write a code exam. But after the midterm, the writing a code portion was removed. And what I would do differently next time is adjust some content, spend some more time on things like containers that would prevent some other pain points, or I think is just something good to include. pull interest for future examples, and maybe try to incorporate a project. And then adjusting evaluation, because if with how some students depend on AI, I think it requires more frequent check-ins on how they're learning. So something like a small, not really announced quiz, but not like super surprising, just like a consistent weekly or bi-weekly, every other week quiz would be a better way to check in with what they're learning, because the labs and homeworks weren't effective enough at that. Avoiding anything heavily weighted that would to discourage cheating, because it became something of a victimless crime, since they could just ask an LLM instead of having someone else as a co-conspirator. And then consider grading something like attendance and participation, because attendance rates were abysmal for this. I had probably 10 of 30 students attending regularly for a graduate course. And then for final takeaways, it's a work in progress of a course. I don't plan to ever have it kind of stagnate. I'd like to keep it evolving. Reducing code development was useful, and that GenAI prevents students from spending the time being bad at something. They need to spend more time just being bad at Bash to learn how to do it better, instead of learning how to prompt engineer in this course. Prompt engineering is great, but this is maybe not the course for it. And yeah, the sucking at something is the first step toward being kind of good at something. And that's it.
All right, thank you. All right, the last presentation is by me, and what I'm going to present is results of a study done for the ACM Education Advisory Committee, which is a task force on generative AI and relating to teaching programming. And this is a picture of all of the people that were part of this task force. You can see it's an international group, and we sought an international point of view on this. So we undertook a survey which turned out to get responses from over 700 educators. About 500 of them completed all of the questions. We analyzed their course level adaptations using GenAI in their courses or around their courses. And we created a curated collection of instructor-contributed approaches and tools that are on a public website, which I'll show you later. We also recently had a hands-on session at the SIG-C conference in March. So there were about 500 complete responses, dominated by North America and Europe, a few fewer from Asia, and even a few from Africa, but not very many. Mostly from people with graduate degree training institutions, but some from associate degree in other institutions as well. So one of the things we asked instructors is, what are the barriers to integrating GenAI into their instruction? And this is for primarily programming instruction. And you can see that the large number of responses had to do with what are the best practices. And I think we're all still searching for those, as Connor indicated in his talk. Their own lack of expertise, because they haven't got the deep expertise that they think they need to teach it. Some of them still don't believe there's a need to integrate GenAI, and there are limitations based on departmental, institutional, or curricular requirements. So related to that, then, there's a large number that feel they need training on best practices to integrate GenAI in instruction. 66% training on how to revise assessment when using GenAI, and so forth, as you can see. The majority of respondents felt that the skills to create software have changed because of GenAI, and they're seeing their students use it extensively, whether or not they forbid it as part of the course. But there are very few that believe it will have no impact. So their concerns are the obvious things and some of which have been mentioned in other talks: an increased dependency on technology to complete the coursework. That's getting into that circular. They don't understand anything that Connor pointed out, as opposed to actually learning how to do programming. Of course, increases in cases of cheating and plagiarism, misinformation, privacy, and other concerns, including some of the ethical concerns that Dr. Masri Zada pointed out earlier. What we found is that a number of instructors have already begun changing both their instruction and assessment in order to adjust to GenAI being here. One is a reduced weight of homework assignments, because majority of homework assignments you can't tell whether they're done by GenAI or the student knows anything based on what they found. Increase in class activities so that they could actually observe if the students were understanding the concepts and the ideas associated with this. They redesigned their projects, making them more open-ended, making them a bit more complicated so that GenAI couldn't come up with the solution. They actually had to think it through themselves. And some of them integrated AI explicitly so that they could control to what extent it was used. And so the focus of the courses tend to be moving from code comprehension rather than syntax. So one good thing about GenAI can give you won't probably make syntax errors, which is of course a trip up for anyone who's starting to learn programming. But the idea is, do you understand what's going on in the code? An emphasis on debugging and testing, an emphasis on problem-solving skills as opposed to just programming skills, and changes in how they assess. And so a lot of people are doing oral exams where they ask the students to explain the code, make sure they actually understood what the algorithms are doing and how it's working. A lot of them have paper and pencil exams, like Connor mentioned, in order to avoid using the computer. And some of them are using controlled environments where they only get limited exposure or access to GenAI. And a number of them are also including discussion of ethics issues associated with this. So there's a lot more in this report, and I have a link to it here. So if you're interested in seeing more details about how people are adjusting to this, please look at this. And the website not only has the final report, but also has community approaches that have been shared. And these are people that are using a variety of tools in their teaching to corral GenAI, doing things like teaching them how to do proper prompt engineering, or creating an environment where GenAI becomes a tutor, but they can't entirely solve the problem, and so on. And there are a number of examples on this website. So with that, I'm going to stop, and now I'm going to open it up for questions from everybody of any of the presenters today. And you can either unmute and ask a question or put something in the chat window, which I will keep an eye on and try to pass those questions along to the presenters. So questions from those in the audience or of each other? So I'll ask a question, Professor Bansal, relative to your students. Some of the things brought up by others indicate some questions about copyright. And so for your PhD students that have created these tools that might become professionally used medical examination tools, what is your thought on what happens as it relates to some of what was discussed on ownership?
Most of the data which is taken is from the public databases, challenge data sets. And some of the students went beyond, and they contacted some hospitals, and they took de-identified data through acknowledgements. And for the images and for the paper writing, we have used this common license from Wikimedia and from the public databases images. So we have been careful not to infringe on the copyright issues.
And what about the ownership of the final products that might become commercial?
It's a PhD project. It belongs to the student. University has no say. I have no say.
Okay.
So whatever they do, they do.
All right. So it's good to know. So Connor, can you see yourself doing something similar in the future? And if so, what, based on the experience you had, what adjustments would you make the next time around?
Yeah, I'd definitely be interested in teaching this again. I may even be teaching it next semester, depending on availability. I think next time, probably, yeah, just smaller steps. I do like the idea of having them submit when they've used AI, like the what the prompts have been. I think that's something good to make sure they're being, accountable for how they use it, and you can kind of check some of that overuse. I think I would like to return a final project because I enjoy seeing some of the creativity in there. But at a certain point, it's whose creativity is it right now? And I think that needs some clarity to me before I'm willing to bring it back, or at least a process that would make it uh, more of the student's own work in some amount. Whether that's having to submit their prompts as part of it and making sure that they're, doing a certain percentage of that work or something similar. Um, but essentially, I just want to make sure they get time to not have pretty code, to not have things that are, doing everything just right, to have mostly working codes, which is that very informative stage where they can have just a small error message that guides them in the right direction, instead of just copying the error into an LLM and hoping that that answer is the right one.
Yeah. Well, Professor Masri Zada, how do you get your students to think about their own creativity and how it relates to all the issues that how do you govern that in the sense of your class that that the students that are using these tools are doing it with original work and not themselves borrowing from others.
Well, this is why we are exploring that open source approach in that regard, because we want to allow. So one of our approaches that was really unique, and this is what the high supercomputer actually helped us create using, actually the method actually got published as a paper by itself, but the idea of it is all of these open source models are installed in an educational way that I could see all the generations of my students, including the LLMs. So in this way, I could help them and at the same time teach them how to actually cite it properly. So we put the method of how to cite it. I'm seeing everything they are generating. I have access to it just in case of abuse. And at the same time, we are doing these workshops and training, including going annually to the Ohio supercomputer so they learn a little bit of background about it. But the most important part is, well, I know some universities are making that initiative to with or against AI. What our approach is to make it optional. It's not a requirement to use AI, nor it's a requirement not to use AI. If you're using AI, cite it properly, use the open source tools, learn how to cite it. So you don't compromise your copyrights and authenticity. If you don't want to use it, I'm going to show you how to do it manually. If you're using creative coding, I tell students, if you know how to write like a Java code from scratch, you are in the wrong discipline. And I tell them like, okay, AI would help you to do the technical part, but you still have your authorship to create. But like we use like JavaScript, Java a lot, but teach what I'm teaching right now is different than how I taught it a couple years ago, because if a student could go to ChatGPT and get the code they want and it's working for them, I cannot scaffold this other than I tell them, if you used it, just consider citing that so you don't compromise your authorship. So it is a process because in the end, students will always find a shortcut to try to find the best way. But if I'm open about it, they are telling me what tools they used, we could find a better educational way rather than make it a taboo, because that's where trying to prove it is harder than trying to have a conversation about it. And that's where what we're trying to do. It's like, okay, I'm providing these sources for you. This is how you cite it. If you used it, let me know what is your authorship, what is your control, and then that's how we could benefit from it rather than doing anything else. I
Okay,
hope that makes sense.
sure. I have one other question in the chat. It says for university use and research, are the universities directly contracting the AA software terms with the vendors and conditions, or are people buying individual use licenses? So I don't know what do you use advanced license, paid for licenses to some of these tools, or I know you said you're using mostly open source, but
I could answer from my university. It was left for each department. So some departments, like business, they chose to have a deal with OpenAI. The university allowed some department to use Copilot, even if I don't prefer it because it's not on par with everything else. But they allowed it with individualized license due to because Ohio University use Teams and Office, so we have higher privacy with institutional licenses. Other departments allowed like it need to go through a full process, especially for privacy in that regard. But mostly right now, the like I got individualized license through the university while actually doing what they call like contract and risk assessment to make sure anything I'm using is it's not compromising any student or research work in that regard. But Copilot right now is falling under institutional licenses, other than the open source. The open source is a different story.
yeah. Anyone else want to address this or?
So my thought about it is that it is a disruptive technology, and if industry is embracing it, then academic institutions sometime have to embrace it. It's like calculators or integrated circuits. So I remember my student days when integrated circuits came, professors said that you have to use transistors and not integrated circuits to design the circuits. And the same thing as the technology improves, if the a marketplace adopts it, then one of the job of the academic institution is to prepare for the marketplace. So we will have to adapt to it and include it in our curriculum in subtle ways.
Right.
We cannot avoid it.
Yeah, I think and the majority of the people that answered our survey had that same attitude, but their concern was what effect was it having on learning? Did the graduates really know what they were supposed to know so that they could be uh, uh, well trained professionals when they came out, or were the tools hampering their learning in some way? So I think
So
that's
it's
still
the same logic which with the calculators. So after the calculators have been introduced, do you say that K-12 students have forgotten or not using the basic arithmetic which they were supposed to learn, or it is a good tool to use because the productivity increases?
yeah. No, I understand both sides of it. I'm just saying what concerns are in the community. Well, if
May
they're not,
I respond with a small thing here?
yeah,
I love this approach in there, but I want to mention that there's always resistance for new technologies. I give this example to my students when calligraphers used in the Middle Ages writing books by hand, when the print press came, everyone was against it. When photography came, painters were against it, and you could still hear people saying, "Photography steal your soul," and people start still avoid it. When the internet came versus traditional libraries, we had that resistance. When Google came and academics started to say, you are not allowed to use Google for research, and look right now for us. So I feel it's not about a current approach as much as it's a new technology. It's like 3, 4 years
Hmm.
for public in there. So I think it's the initial resistance between old educational methods versus new, and people are trying to catch up. And I tell my student, we are in the beginning of the revolution. We are not in the peak. So it would take people time to adjust to understand that this is part of our daily life. And that's where faculty could adapt to it early or could adapt to it later. But I agree with it. Eventually, they need to adapt to it because it's a revolution in education and technology in that regard.
Yeah, well said. Well said. Well, thank you all very much. I think this turned out to be a very interesting session, and I will get this recording published on our SIG Education YouTube channel sometime in the next few days. So thank you again, and have a good summer, everybody. And
Thank you for inviting us.
okay, bye bye.
Thank you.